Welcome everybody. As everyone's starting to join in, we've got a ton of great participants today. Really excited today to welcome Tim Dybvig, who is the previous CEO and founder of Calibrater Health and now current SVP of Patient Engagement. Is that right?
That's correct.
With Xperity, which was the acquirer of Calibrater. So this is one of those awesome kind of founder stories. We invested early on in Calibrator's life cycle, and we were able to watch Tim and his team really grow and thrive. And in particular, the topic of this conversation, successfully sell into many different types of healthcare providers, which is, as you know, not very easy. And it takes kind of a special nuance, I think, to really nail. So I'm excited to talk and dive deeper into this conversation with you, Tim. Again, everyone, welcome to the Jumpstart Distilled live series. This is a program in which we dive deeper into specific topics related to healthcare startups. This is a topic on many founders' minds of how to navigate the notoriously long sales cycles, particularly when you're selling across multiple different types of healthcare entities. Again, Tim Dybvig with Xperity now. He was the founder of Calibrater Health, which was acquired by Xperity. Gosh, how many months ago?
August of last year. So
August
about a year.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
So I invited him to join me in this conversation, but he's going to do a much better job introducing himself. So with that, Tim, I'll hand the reins over to you. Please tell everyone a little bit about yourself and your story, both including Calibrater and a little bit of Xperity.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. Tim Dybvig. My last name's missing a few vowels. Forgive me. I was part of the 2016 cohort of Jumpstart Foundry. Started Calibrater in earnest full-time at the beginning of 2015, but it was actually kind of a nights and weekends project for about 9 months before I went full-time. My background was startups. I studied computer science, so had kind of a technical background, but never had a full-on development role. It was always more product and operations. I worked at a biotech startup that was focused on antibody discovery up in New Hampshire, a financial marketing and literacy startup focused in New York City, focused on improving education and access for the underbanked population. We work with MasterCard and the US Treasury, but kind of all along was training myself, knowing, someday I wanted to take a crack at it myself. And co-founder shopping, I found, had a lot of conversations and eventually met who became my business partner, using MD, MBA. I kind of knew I wanted to go into healthcare because it was, there was a lot of money at stake, a lot of problems. And just being honest, I could tell I'm more of a functional product person. I'm not great design, all this other stuff, more like consumer products. And I could tell based on my experience at the biotech company, if you just make something functional, if I can just create a solution that works, I'm going to win. And so that's what attracted me to healthcare. And so he was in healthcare as an MD, MBA. He had started a few companies. Was also the chief medical officer. So he was kind of the idea, sort of strategy guy. I was always operations and actually built the initial product myself, as I mentioned. It started on like a handshake deal early 2014. And he had access to a customer who basically wanted to use this. So Calibrater was a platform for text message surveys and patient feedback. And we started it with a very basic thesis, which is the current state of this is terrible and we could do it better, which is unique because in retrospect, it made a few things hard because we didn't have a specific thesis necessarily going in. We just went into an area that we knew we could improve, which was good on some cases, but was challenging on others. So started that in 2015. 2016, we actually started a partnership with DocuTap, which became Xperity. But I would say, we did the Jumpstart program, never raised a ton of money. It was, in addition to Jumpstart, it was kind of like friends and family plus. And because, and part of that was honestly related to what I mentioned before, which is like, hey, we think we got something here, but we didn't have a very specific thesis, that we were trying to execute on. And so I think, for raising larger amounts of venture, it was a little uncertain. And so instead, I said, you know what, I'm just going to make this thing work, and I'm going to get it to profitability, because I was at a founder panel with the founder of Akamai in New York City one time, and he said, never forget, he said, being profitable means never having to say you're sorry. And I was like, that's what I'm going to do. And so with a team of like 3 or 4 people, we were able to get to profitability by, I think it was like late 2017, early 2018. And so that, that allowed us to not have to, it allowed us some flexibility and some freedom or whatever. And then fast forward, Xperity is actually a private equity roll-up. It's a Warburg Pincus roll-up of 2 EMRs in the urgent care space. One was called DocuTap and one was Practice Velocity. We were actually a longtime partner of DocuTap, and I think, if I'm being honest, it was kind of a try to buy situation that they were doing with us, engaging in a partnership. And eventually it worked out in 2020. Had some conversations pre-COVID. I was actually getting ready to try to sell the business already, but I let some folks there know, hey, you know what? I think I'm going to take this thing to market next year. If there's any conversations you'd like to have, let me know. And it turns out they did want to have some conversations, and it fit in not only the product, but my role as well as a bit of an acqui-hire in some sense. But I'll stop there. That's kind of the history of Calibrater and whatever. A lot of stuff to add in, but I will stop there for the next question.
That's perfect. That's perfect. So again, for everyone listening in, I think the big highlight here is knowing that Tim kind of that transition from the founder, co-founder, and then to early sales and early pilot partnerships, and then how those partnerships and really strategic relationships early on then transitioned into a fantastic acquisition and ultimately an acqui-hire opportunity for Tim. But I think one of the biggest things is, we invested in 2016. When we first invested, you're absolutely right, Tim, like your sales pitch was relatively kind of broad, but I knew you were closing deals and closing pilots and customers with a lot of different types of customers. So my first question, and I think it actually resonates probably with a lot of founders on the call today, is that it's something every founder really struggles with, is that FOMO of like the fear of missing out on a sale. And like anyone that is interested in talking to you about your product, you're going to like chase after them, and that you're really inclined to pursue. So I want to ask you kind of your experience in those very early days, Tim, about, did you run up against some of those moments of like, oh, maybe this is like the ideal customer profile that I'm looking for? Or, was it, no, I'm going to keep my head like so focused on finding this type of customer? I don't know. I want your experience first, and then, maybe the advice that you'd give yourself, now having been through that.
Yeah, for sure. So our first customer was an urgent care group, still with us today. I'm happy to say one of our largest customers, actually. And it was, as I mentioned, it was a relationship that my partner had. And basically they were like doing this survey methodology. They literally had a clinic manager sending texts themselves. And I was like, I'm not sure, but I can probably automate that. Let me give that a shot. And so it was really very close customer driven development. And I was like, tell me more. What do you want? What do you want? What do you want? Which is why we knew we were solving a real problem, but that's what this thing about like didn't really have a thesis. I was just listening to people and saying, okay, you want this? Like I can do that. Don't pay somebody to do it. I'll automate it. And so so that's was our journey. But so our first customer is urgent care. And when we came to Jumpstart, when we actually learned this during the program, when we came there, if you remember, the pitch was, look, we're gonna build this product in the urgent care market because we have a couple of named clients that are liking it and are enjoying it, and then build out the product. And once we have the vision, then we're going to go approach health systems and kind of go upstream, right, to like the bigger fish. And what we realized during that year, 2016, is we weren't building a product for health systems. We were building a product for ambulatory like for urgent care, and specifically what we realized later about urgent care when we started reaching different types of customers is when we realized that, well, it wasn't urgent care specifically so much as it was kind of commoditized ambulatory care where service is very important. So almost like retail medicine. So we expanded into sort of sideways areas like eye care, dentistry, where, you know, everyone's kind of price sensitive. You're looking at your Google reviews. It's all word of mouth. You know, I could go to this one, that one, like it doesn't really matter. But we in the early days, we didn't know who we were going to sell to. It was just like, well, I got this urgent care customer, so I'll do that. And we had this assumption that, but of course, eventually we're going to go to health systems. And along the way, I actually did 2 pilots in New York City, one with Lenox Hill, the ER that's part of Northwell Health, the largest health system and largest employer in New York State. And then another pilot with New York Presbyterian, another giant hospital in the area. But even in the scope of that, I learned a lot because A, the process was horrible, and B, they only put us in like their ER department. They had like their own version of like in-house urgent care. And what I realized is like, oh, I'm building an ambulatory outpatient product. This has nothing to do with health systems, inpatient, rounding, that whole world. And so I was like, okay, that was kind of interesting. The other thing, and this is where my partner's knowledge of the space in general really helped a lot, because I was good at listening to customers, building those relationships, and I'd kind of bring those requirements back to him and say, okay, they're saying this, why do you think that is? Okay, blah, blah. But he helped us avoid some big pitfalls. Specifically, it's very attractive to go after health systems and say, you know, if I just get this deal, boom, that's, you know, $1 million a year. But we started realizing if you do it too soon and you don't have multiple, you know, partners, you're just contract software development for a large health system. And that's kind of it. And it's not to say there aren't great products that can be built jointly with the health system, but I was scared that it would be so hard to say no to whatever they wanted. And I remember also trying to get a salesperson at one point, and this guy had sold into hospitals, and he's like, well, you know, the old joke about selling into health systems, you know, one health system, and so like, they're all different, right? And so they all want different things. And obviously there's overlap in the products that they want, but I was really worried about that. A, and B, we didn't have 18 months to do the sales cycle to commit to wait, you know, for the large health system deals. And then on top of that, we realized that urgent care as an industry was also in super growth mode, and it was newer. And so interestingly, one of the things we found when we went into eye care and dentistry, those industries they're very steady state. They've been around for a very long time. So the names and the brands in that ecosystem are a lot more known quantity. And despite the fact that so it's like Solution Reach is a big one. I forget the other one, but they're the same thing. They're like email-based products that are very bad. They don't offer a lot of insight when it comes to surveys, feedback, NPS, whatever. And the people that we won over, they were like, oh my gosh, it's not even the same category. But they have so much mind share in those markets because those markets are sort of, they like I said, they're more mature. Whereas urgent care, it was like the Wild West. Everyone's just, and they're much more experimental. And so they're like more willing to take a chance on the new guys. So what that meant is we started out saying, we're, you know, all of healthcare. Oh, well, yeah, we have this urgent care customer, but we really want health systems. And then it was actually in that year, and when we also got the DocuTap partnership, where I said, also because I was like not raising $1 bajillion and like needed to get to profitability, I said, you know what, let's just focus on urgent care. We decided that around 2016 and did that for like 2 or 3 years. Just because, you know, we didn't, as a shop of 3, 4, 5 people, you don't need that many deals to get to profitability. And so we did that. And at that time, that was a really good call. And so, you know, and we learned it actually through a lot of the introductions we got from Jumpstart, talking to some of these health systems and realizing like, wow, this is not as good a fit as I thought, and they're going to want something else. So, you know, it was a journey learning who our ideal customer profile was. I think the other helpful thing was I was the one guy who was coding and selling, and so it was really, there was never that disconnect between, you know, what is being built versus what is being sold and that kind of priority. And so I was able to gather a lot of, like, all the requirements from every conversation I had went straight into my, you know, product brain. And also in the sales conversations, I could be very honest and just be like, oh yeah, no, we're not going to, that's not what we do. And I feel like, you know, there are times if those roles are different folks, there's room for gaps in that. But really it was the decision to go with urgent care that really made a big difference for us. And also that early stage partnership. I mean, you could see it's like the revenue went the month that they went live with us, which was very fortunate. And actually, yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, one thing I was going to say is we also, I gave away everything on that partnership because I knew, I was like, I really need this. And they were like, you know, they made a 30% revenue share instead of 20%. But more importantly, they were like, oh, well, you know, senior leadership is not really sure about this because, you know, texting and surveys, it's like definitely on our roadmap. So, you know, we can't sign a thing that says we're not going to. And I told him, he was the head of product at the time. I was like, you know what? We can put in the contract, you could rebuild my system line for line, screen for screen. I don't care. You can have it all because you're never going to get to it. I know you're never going to get to it. But I think I've seen instances in the past where people in the early days get aggressive or like to negotiate contracts and whatever else, even on the early stages, you know, because they don't want to get screwed over or whatever. But I don't know. I would not have been able to do the deal if I hadn't told them you could copy every screen in my software and I'll never go after you, because I knew I wasn't getting it, which is to say, you know, if you have to give up some stuff in the early days, make some concessions to get good partnerships. I mean, that partnership was everything. And eventually,
Well, it was incredible. It was influent. Yeah, it was indicative and kind of it set the course for where you are now. I feel like in your answer there, you hit on a topic that I wanted to get to, which is, you know, how your sales pitch really evolved, like through that evolution of we're selling to health systems to hold up. It's not really a full health system. It's more so an urgent care within, so the ER almost acting as urgent care within the health system. But then how that then translated to dentistry and optometry and chiropractic and others, kind of how, I'm curious, just again, for the other founders listening in, how fast did that happen? And what were the triggering moments or like signals that you saw? Obviously you saw that it was happening, but I think the big thing for you and what has made Calibrater so successful now is that you caught it and you listened to it early on. And so was there anything that helped really kind of help you make that pivot relatively quickly without wasting so much time and getting caught up in kind of where we started, these notoriously long sales cycles?
Yeah, it's a good question. And honestly, it took us a minute to figure out what the messaging was. Mm-hmm. I knew and a sales pitch of like, just trust me, as soon as you try it, you'll know why it's awesome. Doesn't work very well, but like that's what it was in the early days. And we'd give away pilots and stuff and convert almost all of them. But it was hard because, like I said, originally we didn't have a thesis. I was just listening to these customers articulate their problems. Oh, you know, when I get the survey results, I then put it into a spreadsheet and I pass it around to the executive team and they make sure that I'm following up on all this other stuff. And I'm like, oh, like a ticketing system? You want me to like attach that to the surveys? And they're like, that's awesome. Yeah, do that. So we built our ticketing system. And then I was working with a data scientist to do all this reporting and whatever else. And he's like, you know, like I could probably write some algorithms based on your data set that would automatically like categorize all this stuff. I was like, you can? That's awesome. So it was very opportunistic, but I knew that what I was building was valuable because they liked it and it was working, but I didn't always know why. And so it actually took us a while. And again, this is where Adam's insight came in, where eventually we talked about it as a platform. As you know, originally it was, you talk about the features, what it does. Oh, it's surveys, NPS surveys, you know, text message surveys. And everyone's like, well, whatever, we all have it. There's a lot of those and you're just one of many. And then we started talking about it most recently at the acquisition, it was an AI powered platform for improving customer service and team culture. And again, this is huge insights from Adam, understanding, because he's the chief medical officer of a home healthcare company. He's a hospitalist at Dartmouth Hitchcock. He started a couple other service-based. This is the only pure technology play that he started, but he's started other service-based businesses. And he realized that our approach to the system was actually, he was like, it's a customer service platform. At one point, we wanted to call it like Zendesk for healthcare.
Mm-hmm.
And we were at this weird intersection because people just thought of, and so we realized we had to use text message surveys to get in the door, because that put us in a category. And they're like, aha, I know what you are. But then once I had my way in the door, the way we differentiated was, look, we send text message surveys, but what we're actually selling you is better customer service and happier providers, because we're giving them all the insight, we're showing them all the data, we're giving them scorecards to see how they're doing, and we're giving you as managers a framework to make sure that every bad complaint, every low score, whatever, is being followed up on, thereby leading to, again, improved customer service and team culture. Because
which I think I was just want to chime in, because I think that's a big thing that I see a lot of founders in the early stages doing, is trying to like sell something bigger in their first pitch, and like selling like we're improving customer service at large. And these I don't know, these health systems or practices are like, no, you're a startup company. You can't do all of that right now. But if you give them one thing to really focus and hone in on and say, we really do this well, get in the door. And then almost like the land and expand, but almost like you landing and then expanding your service lines to them. And saying like, we can cover we're really great at text message surveys, but also we do a hell of a lot more on top of that.
That's right. And it's also recognized we were an incrementally better product, right? And so There are some of you on the call today who are going to you're creating your own market. I do not know as much about that. And you probably have more potential upside, right? Because when you create a market, then you tend to be the owner of it. But an important part for us to realize, and Adam would always get a little swirly eyed about the pitch. And I'm like, no, man, especially urgent care. These people are business people, and they are busy, and they are seeing patients, and like they have to know where you fit in their world like that. Because if they don't, and you start saying too much of this, the high level wishy-washy stuff up front, you could see their eyes glaze over. And so, and that was an important thing that I learned, and that I was glad that I stuck to it, because I realized I was like, no, trust me, I know that we're a lot more, but we have to get in the door with text message surveys. That's like, and so that was important.
Yeah. And I am so glad that we're taking, a little bit of extra time talking about that, because I feel like I say it a lot to our founders, but it's much more impactful when it comes from a founder that has been successful in closing those deals and then ultimately an acquisition. So I do actually want to switch the conversation to that acquisition and kind of going from, okay, I've figured out these different types of customer profiles that I'm selling to. I have a good partnership with one, but then really what was that switch, that transition from customer partner to acquisition target? Maybe just talk through that. And then just as a quick aside to everyone on the call, now would be a great time. If you're thinking of questions you want to have, throw them in the chat, say, I have a question, so I can kind of screen questions as they come through or order people accordingly. So if you have questions, make sure submit it in the chat. But Tim, I'll let you answer that question first.
Yeah. So ours was, we got very lucky with timing, but as much of kind of a no-brainer as it was, because they were urgent care focused. We were mostly urgent care focused. We had started to branch out into eye care and dentistry, as I said. We had a couple really big fish in that pond. We had like a 300 location eye care private equity roll up. We had a 220 location dental roll up. So we were making some inroads into that space, but still at exit, 70% of our business was urgent care. and they were two urgent care EMRs that had just merged, and it was a Warburg Pincus investment that was, the clock was ticking on that, and they still needed to fill out a few pieces of their portfolio. And it was like, well, we've just known each other for years, but we were like the urgent care solution, they were the urgent care solution. So it was a really, really good and like almost obvious fit. And so I think that certainly helped, but it was a lot of timing, and it was a lot of, coincidence. But it was definitely because of the partnership. And I was actually just having this conversation with another founder friend of mine earlier this week. They make, it's called Stackwave. They make products for biotech startups. So they have like their own lab information management system, their own eLab notebook, a couple other products, some quality control products. And originally they started as a service business, but then also built their own toolkit, and then like where they could make their own services on top of that. But then also, as they got more clients, they also started building products. And so they're kind of transitioning from a services business to a product business. And there's some big players out there. And I was like, look, the best thing to do is just start developing these relationships, because I can tell you 60% of my business flowed through this company. I had known them for 4 years, like worked with all of them. I had a long list of high profile customers that we shared that all vouched for me, my software, everything was like, yeah, it was awesome. And it was still, not, it's as obvious as it got, but it was still hard to do, right? And there's still a lot of, so I don't know. And so my advice to my other friend is, I don't think acquisitions kind of come out of, it's rare that they come out of nowhere, that where somebody's just like, oh, somebody else is in the space and we'll just wait for the big guy to come like take us out. Like, no, chances are they've been having conversations for years, kind of behind the scenes, waiting for the right moment or whatever else. And so we were, I think that long-standing partnership laid the groundwork for acquisition, but it also required my taking action as well, because it wasn't, again, they didn't come to me. I just stayed really close to them and then kind of forced their hand when I said, look, 18 months from now, I'm taking this thing to market and I'm going to get a banker and I'm going to hit X revenue targets. That's the other thing. I knew I talked to a lot of bankers and a lot of folks to say, okay, for a business at our scale, we were in single digit millions. It was not the craziest thing, but I said, at this scale, what do we need to hit? And they said, well, typically multiples in this range or that, and your growth rate should be X and whatever. So I had enough information to know, okay, if I can hit, I know the target, know about how long it's going to get there and whatever else. And that gave me ammunition to know if I were to take it to market, it would probably be successful. And then I was confident I could get there. So I'd kind of done my homework and then went to them confidently and said, look, I'm going to take this to market. So I still had to kind of like force their hand, but it's really that partnership and that relationship. And like, I even if it's competitive, I would say there's no downside. You can't build those relationships too early and just get on people's radars. And if you can partner, great, awesome. But even if not, just have an open dialogue, just be communicating with them, in the context of an exit. But it's that made a big difference for us. It's not like I just, started knocking on folks' doors. And also I tried that approach with some other people who in my mind, I was like, this is a really obvious fit. They're going to love the company. And their corp dev guy was like, I don't know, we got like a really long roadmap. Like, let's talk in 18 months. And I was like, oh, there goes that option. And so that was, some obvious things in my mind or whatever didn't work out. And it was the one that I had the longstanding relationship that ended up being a lot more successful.
Yeah. Well, that's incredibly helpful just for everyone thinking like, okay, here are my maybe current customers that, might be good early, I guess maybe early validators, but okay, who are actually going to be the early partners that can turn to strategic partner in, 2-3 years after launching. Yep. I do want, before I get to my last question that I have queued up, I want to make sure that we touch on any attendee questions. So I had a good question come in from Steven. Steven, you're welcome to ask it live. Are you still on the line? You can
I am still on the line.
Perfect. Yeah, I'll let you ask your question live.
So in selling to the healthcare systems, a lot of times they're looking for both the use case, that is what it actually does. But then at the end of the day, and I think you mentioned it, we were talking about how difficult these hospitals are and health systems to purchase. They want the business case. So what type of tool or what was expected from you to be able to demonstrate the value or how they would pay for your service?
It's a really good point, and something we struggled with for a really long time, because our platform was, because it's hard to measure how you improve customer service, right? Or like it's hard to measure how the engagement of your employees. And so we had to get kind of creative with it, and I think we never really nailed it. The billing model was easier for us. As I soon found out, it was a per location charge in urgent care, because these businesses, they have 1, 2, 200 locations. They all look and feel exactly the same. They do the same thing. And I just, after talking to enough people, that's just how products bill in urgent care most of the time. Obviously there's different, if you're x-rays, you bill by, volume or whatever else, but a lot of these products, certainly the ones in my space, usually just billed per location. So I kind of stumbled into that. Then it was price point, and it was kind of the same thing. Like you talk to enough people and it's like, just a product like ours was within these tiers. And we said we were the Cadillac version, so we were going to be on the end of it. But that stuff was kind of predetermined for us. It did get more difficult when because we did sell into some health systems. We were in multi-care health in the Pacific Northwest, in like all of their ambulatory. So we're in like their labs, their physical therapy, their wound care, their like all kinds of stuff. And that we essentially just took the volumes and then converted it into, okay, those volumes, what would that pricing be in our urgent care model? And kind of did some hand waving, because per location doesn't work with, you have 5 wound care patients and 500, lab folks in the same day. And so per location doesn't break down. But urgent care was more straightforward. As far as the ROI, you can actually, if you go to calibrater.com, on the footer, I think you should be able to, or maybe even in the main menu now, there's an ROI calculator. What we did was we tried to frame it in the context of our ticketing system for service recovery. So that was a big value add and a differentiator for a lot of survey products, where most of the time, you send a survey and then they give you an Excel sheet full of responses. We took that several steps further and had automated processes for, opening tickets, assigning them, giving visibility to the managers. Okay, Sarah has 10 tickets assigned, Tim has 2 tickets assigned, he hasn't closed any in X time, whatever. Introducing transparency. And our point was, look, with a 35% response rate and about X percent, it's like 5% of people are going to give you a 0, or were detractors or whatever, had a bad experience. In the course of a month, we're going to offer you up in this perfect framework for service recovery, following up, whatever. We're probably going to give you 20 to 40 opportunities to save a patient. If you can capitalize on one of those, then based on the average lifetime value of a patient, we have more than paid. The software is more than paid for itself. And the hope is you're capitalizing on, 50% of those. And so that's how we did it, as far as, okay, lifetime visit of a patient or value of a patient. And if we could, as a customer service platform or service recovery platform, if we could help you convert one of those based on, however many tiers that they had to get through, which was an incredibly low bar. That's how it paid for itself. But what was interesting is like that we came to that late in the game, and like, because we felt like we had to, and people would ask for it. It still never, I don't think, was like crucial in any deals. It was helpful for the folks on that side to like, okay, let me take this back to my boss, kind of a thing. But like that number in itself never sold us deals. People were bought into the concept of it, and we kind of had to give that to them so that they had something. But for us, it was not as clear of like a hard ROI. It was, and customers delineated themselves that way too. People would be like, I have a survey system, I don't need yours, hang up. And the people who understood, who were, more sophisticated, whatever, they were like, yep, totally get it. Like, I don't need the ROI, I'm in. So we were a little bit different, but you're absolutely right. I mean, I went into healthcare being like, no, if I'm just providing a better product or service, like the healthcare industry is going to love it. And they're like, no, show me, how are you going to decrease my costs, or how are you going to increase my top line? And that's it.
Thank you.
So Tim, I got another good question actually from a fellow portfolio company, but a 2020 portfolio company, Elnaz. I can go ahead and, if you're still on, Elnaz, you can ask live, or I can ask Tim as well. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and ask you, Tim, this great question. So, and it honestly ties into your answer a little bit, but Elnaz would appreciate any thoughts you have on reducing the sales cycles to hospitals. It sounds like, the sales pitch that you did have, and when you were talking to hospital systems, and particularly like landing a handful of, emergency room pilot contracts, what was it about that sales pitch that helped you get in the door I don't want to say relatively quickly, because I know it was not an overnight thing. But what do you think it was that maybe helped make that process a little bit more efficient?
Yeah, I mean, you basically have to do their work for them. In the case of the two pilots I did in the hospitals, they were both IRBs, which is a study. And we did the study because then you didn't have to go through, vendor management or whatever. And so I didn't get any money from it, but I got to say I was working with Northwell Health and learned a lot from that whole experience. And so that was important.
Yeah.
But I was filling out all the paperwork, and and he's like, I don't know, there's this IRB form somewhere. And I was actively managing the process and making sure I was at the top of his inbox every week. What do we need to do next? What do we need to do next? Very friendly, but recognize that, if you are know who your not just who your ideal customer is, ideal health system, but who's the person at that health system that you want to be talking to. Is it the, innovation person? Is it the dietary person? Is it clinical? Is it operational? Whatever. So start with that. But once you have that champion, you got to do their work for them, because they have to sell it up and down the organization, right? Like I had the chair of the chair of the ER department wanted this stuff. The chief medical officer of, I think, that hospital wanted it. Somebody else wanted it, and it was still impossible to do just because of their own administrative hurdles and whatever. And so it's you don't expect them to do it for you. You have to give them the materials to sell it internally. You have to stay on top of the process. You have to, kind of do some of that work for them.
I think that's a big thing to highlight, which is, and it's not intuitive, I don't think, to step in and do the work for the person you're selling to. You can feel like you're stepping on someone's toes a bit. So how did you, maybe just elaborate on that a little bit of navigating, let me do that for you versus just
it's a great question. And in this case, I just made myself so completely available. And I would literally, there were days when I would just go to the chair of the ER, his office, and I'd be like, all right, let's just do this together. That's what I set up. Cause he would be like, oh yeah, I have this form. And then it wouldn't get done, and it wouldn't get done. And I was like, why don't I just come to the office and we'll just bang it out together, And I literally sat over his shoulder and was like, what do you think the answer is? I don't know. What do you think I don't know. And so we made, you get through it. And then what really helped was, once I had done the IRB at Northwell, it was actually his buddy who was the chair of the ER at New York Presbyterian. And so I knew the playbook to go to Presbyterian. And I said, they were texting each other. He was like, hey, you should talk to this Tim guy. It's a cool product. And then when he got there, they're like, so what do we want to do? And I was like, I don't know, guys, what you guys think, but right across the street, we made an IRB. This is how we did it, whatever. And they're like, that sounds great. Let's do the exact same thing. And I copy and paste some of the IRB language and all that stuff. But I had the playbook. I came to them and I was like, this is probably what we're going to need to do, and still had to stay on top of the process. Lots of in-person meetings to see this person. And again, make sure they're actually signing and move the paper from this room to that room and all the stuff. But it's you just got to stay all over them.
I know. And I know it particularly now sounds just so in-person, labor intensive, but my hope is that as things are getting better after a wild year of COVID, luckily, hopefully some of those kind of, I would say, more active, a little bit pushier sales processes and practices will come back into play. But so again, I like to try to keep these conversations right about 45, 50 minutes. So if you have any other questions, please submit them in the chat or just raise your hand, say that you want to ask a question. So I'll give everyone a few more minutes to submit those, but a little off topic here, but again, I think it's incredibly relevant for any founder listening in, is again, your transition, Tim, as kind of founder, CEO, the one calling the shots, the one like running through walls and jumping through hoops to close sales. What has that transition been like from being that person to now kind of as a management team member within your acquirer? Again, totally off topic, but I think it's actually quite interesting to think about like the main person selling to and managing that whole process top to bottom to now operating kind of within the organization. And I'm just curious to get your take on how things are going and what you've enjoyed about it, what was unexpected, and
yeah, absolutely. And it's a good question. So I mentioned earlier, I was, technical background, coded the product. I'm like a product and engineering guy. I learned sales and marketing because I had to, because I was trying to build a business. And that was, to be honest, part of starting Calibrater was, I want to see if I have what it takes or what all of these other skills are that I know I need to learn, what's that about? So the sales stuff I learned on the job, so to speak. And it was not my favorite part of it. I'll be honest, it's a tough thing, period. But like I had also spent zero part of my professional life doing it. And so learning it was a very steep learning curve, a lot of conferences, we ended up going to a lot of conferences and it was taking a lot of energy. But the point is, it was not my instinct. And I did it because I was building a business and because that's how you build businesses. But certainly once the Xperity thing happened, I enabled that sales team as quickly as I could. And they called me in as like deep backup, and I'm just like done, which is really nice. And so the main thing is, as part of the acquisition, you kind of go, they hired me to do what I'm best at, which is product and engineering. And so that's where I'm having the biggest impact at the company, is defining the roadmap, making sure it's getting built right and that stuff. Obviously I weigh in on marketing, weigh in on sales, as SVP of patient engagement, I'm kind of like the GM of the business unit, but the company isn't really organized into business units. It's all very vertical. So fun fact, I have 0 reports, which is also kind of awesome. But I'm basically like an advisor, like internally. And so I just work with whoever needs me to work with them at the time. But I spend, I would say 70% of my time on product and engineering because that's what I'm good at and that's what I love. And that's why it was a bit of an acqui-hire. As I said, it wasn't just, and my team was small. So there were 7 of us at the time of acquisition. And so they went into their various departments. So that's been good. So it was really nice to have professional sales support because I always figured, and it seems to have been true, like if I could sell it, then like what could a pro do? And sure enough, they're not having a hard time selling the product, which is awesome. Definitely getting used to a different company and not being my own company. Obviously, as a senior executive, I have some leeway, but still report to the CEO and got to do things their way. I'll be honest, joining a company during COVID sucks. It's really hard. And like they were not a remote first company, so they were stumbling through it and bumbling around. And like I didn't meet the CEO, the CFO, chief legal, the whole senior executive team in person until, I don't know, 3 or 4 months after I had joined, right? Like deal was signed, everything. Like there were no dinners, there was no travel, there was no nothing. And that part was really weird because like my first day on the job, I was just a guy who just started showing up on Zoom calls. And like, yeah, they announced me at some like town hall, hey, there's a new guy, Tim. But like, that was it, and it was really hard. It was really, really hard because there was not a lot of, you're in the room, hey, here's this guy, here's these people, they do that. Like I would literally have to just like find my way into meetings and be like, what's going on? So that part was challenging, but hopefully it's also a once in a lifetime event. So
yeah, fingers crossed.
Yeah, but it's cool because I do, you do kind of get rid of the stuff that you don't like and focus on the stuff that you do, which is cool.
Which I think is a goal for almost everyone on the call. Yeah,
for sure.
Okay, well, I have one great kind of like very specific question coming in from someone, from Michael. And Michael, if you want to come off mute and ask your question, I welcome you to do that. And then maybe we'll take one more question after this one and then wrap things up. So Michael, are you on?
I am. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi. I had a question about the contracts that you're signing and the length of the contracts. What's the term length? Do you find that hospitals like 1-year deals, 2-year deals, multiple year deals, monthly? From your experience, what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, good question. All of our deals were month to month going into this, only because, again, and this is my approach, and also what made me perhaps a terrible salesperson, is I was like, look, I know we're the little guy. Like, I'm gonna prove it to you based on the merits of our product, but in order to do that, I got to get in, and I'm not going to get in if I put up all these barriers. And so I was like, look, month to month, you can walk away anytime. Our retention was awesome. Our conversion was awesome because the product spoke for itself once we did get in there. So I just went with month to month. They would like auto renew every year or whatever, but the actual terms were you could walk away anytime. And I did that strategically because it was a sales tactic. I gave a 30-day pilot, sometimes longer if they were larger, and for free, totally free. And then would recoup that with some implementation fees if they did move forward. And then it was just month to month because that was part of the sales pitch. I was like, look, you're only going to pay for it if you like it. And, it reduced the friction to getting it installed in the first place. Because the other, once they go to the time, even taking the time to do a pilot, there's a lot of intention there. They're not going to do nobody's going to do a pilot in healthcare because let's just see how it goes. Like, everyone is way too busy. So everyone goes into a pilot hoping and wanting it to work. And so that was my only thing. I was like, if I can get to a pilot, I'm going to convert them and they're going to stay. And so I didn't want to give them any reason to say no, including, oh, sorry, it's a 2-year contract and all this other stuff. And I know that people get away with that. They totally do, even as young companies. That's just not me, and wasn't the tactic I went with. But like I said, our retention was excellent, and it didn't prove to be like a massive barrier.
Awesome. All right. I've got, of course, in the final couple of minutes, all the great questions flowing in. That's typically how it goes. So I'm going to ask Victor's question just for him. So, most effective lead gen tactics, what did you find worked best? Essentially, maybe after you figured out kind of the better, more defined ICP.
Yeah, we never had a robust inbound, right? Like we didn't have a lot of like landing pages, and I wasn't expecting people to show up. It was all outbound, and we got very good at prospecting. And what's the Salesforce guy? He's got a really good book on just simple selling, and it's called something like that. Totally forget what it is, but it's his
and you
point
think
is,
of it, I'll send it out with the email that
yes,
goes out with this recording.
I'll do some Googling. Yeah. But his point is basically like, it's, prospecting should be half of what you do, right? As a salesperson, and it's true. And so we actually, it wasn't until later in the company, and I brought in a sales consultant who had been VP of sales at a bunch of companies, and he helped us define our process. The next question, how long is your sales cycle presently? Between 3 and 9 months. So that's, 3 was the best. In some cases, a little bit shorter than that, but on average, it was about 6 months, even for the urgent care, when all is said and done. It always felt a little bit sooner. Like we'd get to, 3 months and like have like a verbal, and then it would take another 6 weeks to actually get the thing signed and then actually start the pilot, because you get it signed and then you're like, cool, now I need a sample file and to talk to your tech folks. And you're like, boom, that's another 2 months, So if I'm being honest, from first phone call to, first survey, it was like 6 months. But getting back to it, we used Apollo. It was an automated outbound system. Their Sales Loft is like the really expensive one. Apollo is like pretty good. All these systems they start as like just a database or just a tool, and then all the modern ones end up being both. So Apollo was an automated outbound tool, but then of course has its own database, but like their data was not great, certainly for urgent care. I looked into Zoom. I've heard Zoom Info's data is really good. They're just really expensive. And so at the end of the day, we just had our own process. And like you just find these like random lists of places of like the top urgent care or the top whatever. And like, those are gold because it gives you 100 brands. And then you have your little, you Google this, you LinkedIn that, you do whatever, you find as many contacts as you can. Hunter.io is good for finding emails, but really it came down to, it wasn't lead gen, I would say, so much as we knew what our customers were, urgent care, and I knew the titles, and then it was just prospecting the hell out of them to find those emails. Conferences, of course, helped. Later at the very end, we did actually engage with a content marketing person to be doing blog posts that she then promoted on LinkedIn, more landing pages that would get a little bit of inbound, but realistically, it was all outbound efforts.
Yeah. Some really great advice. I feel like we could go on and on and on with all of this. So Tim, I want to thank you for taking so much time today to talk to everyone. Do think on the book, because I always love to send out kind of the recap of this, some extra reading or extra tidbits for everyone to follow up on. Thank you everyone who joined. Again, if you had to dip out early or anything like that, we do send out the recording of this to anyone that was registered. Please forward on that link to anyone that you think this would find this valuable. And I hope to see many of you on next month's Jumpstart Distilled. We'll be announcing my next guest in the coming weeks. And there you go. Predictable revenue business practices.
Aaron Ross, predictable revenue. Yep.
Perfect. All right, guys. Well, Tim, thank you so much again. And
absolutely. Thank you for having me on, Eller. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Everyone have a great afternoon, and we'll talk soon.